Ben is a game developer and the author of How to Score Your First Game Job, a how-to book based on his 10 plus years of experience working in the game industry. If you haven't already, please share this live stream with your feed so your friends can join as well. Ben, what will you be discussing today?
Today, I'm going to be talking about how you can get started writing your own text games with ChoiceScript, which is a really good free tool. It's also open source and easy to use.
All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to you and I'll jump back in for Q&A during the last few minutes.
Great. Thanks, Angelin. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay. There we go. Oops. Yeah, so thanks for tuning in. So this talk is going to be all about writing your own text games with ChoiceScript, which is what we're going to get into. One general note is that this talk is geared toward all levels of technical ability. So even if you've never touched a programming language or never worked in games at all, it's totally for you. And the other thing is that if you are working on a ChoiceScript game, or at some point want to try it out and have any questions, I'm usually volunteering at tech office hours. So just check out the sign up sheet when you feel like you might have some questions. I'd be happy to help. Another general note is that I do have a dog, and whenever we get mail, she likes to flip out. So if you hear random dogs screaming in the background, at some point, that's what that is. Okay, so taking a look at the agenda, we're going to start with taking a look at ChoiceScript, what it is and how you can use it. Then we'll get into some additional ChoiceScript tools and resources that you can use while you're getting set up with the language and making your game. Then we'll get into some general game design tips, some good things to keep in mind as you're working on your game, kind of fleshing out your idea. And then lastly, we'll look into how you can publish your game and even make money with it with choice of games. But first, so who am I and why should you even listen to me? So I've been a game developer since 2004, kind of off and on through the years. I've worked on over 24 games for 17 different companies. Here's just a few of the games and companies I work for. I've been working in games in many capacities. As a full-time developer, as a contractor on different projects, as an indie developer working on my own projects. I've been the one hiring. I've been a lecturer. I work part-time. And I've also worked in multiple capacities as a producer, a game designer, and writer. So the games I've worked on cover console games, PC games, Facebook games, original intellectual property and licensed properties you may recognize, educational games, text games, and even military training simulations. So I've seen a good amount of game development practices from a lot of different angles. The other thing is that I've taken all of this knowledge and I wrote a book just to kind of help other people looking to get started into games. It's called How to Score Your First Game Job. There's also specific recommendations for each discipline. So if you're interested in game production or programming, writing, design, or even audio, there's different sections for each type. You can check that out more at scoreyourfirstgamejob.com. And they also will post some game job postings and career advice at Get a Game Job on Twitter, if you're curious about that side of things. Okay, so first step, we're going to take a look at getting started with ChoiceScript. So what even is ChoiceScript? So it's a free and open source scripting language published by Choice of Games, and it's designed to easily create multiple choice text-based games. And the best thing about it, in my opinion, is that it's specifically designed for non-technical users. So when they created it, they created something that they wanted people who were writers first, or someone not from a typical game design background to use. So what is Choice of Games? So they're a game publisher and developer. They were founded in 2010, so they've been around for a while. And their stated purpose, according to their website, is to produce high-quality, text-based, multiple-choice games. So this is kind of what they've been aiming to do from the beginning, and they've been pretty successful at it. Okay, so what does a ChoiceScript game look like? So let's take a look. So if you go to choiceofgames.com, you can see all of their games here from this Games tab. And there's a whole lot of different options here, but we're just going to look all the way at the bottom at the very first game that they released called Choice of the Dragon. Okay, and because this was their first game, it's pretty straightforward, but I think it does a good job of explaining kind of how it works, how one of these games plays. So let us begin. A knight charges up the slope at you. His horse pounds at the ground, carrying the heavily armed warrior as if he were a child's doll. The knight sets its lance to attack you. How do you defend yourself, O mighty dragon? So there's a few options if you want to start flying away, if you want to fight the knight, or if you want to rush into him and try to tear him to pieces. So let's do that. The knight's lance shatters against your nigh impenetrable hide as you slam into him. You yank him clean off his horse, slamming him to the ground and ripping his plate armor with your vicious claws. The fight is over before it has begun. Do you finish him off, victorious dragon? So you can definitely finish him right now, let him live, or just kind of disregard him. Let's let him live. So as we're doing this and making these choices, we're affecting how the player's character, in this case, the dragon, is kind of being built. So if you want to take a look at the stats page, you can see this game has a few different stats. So there's brutality and finesse, cunning and honor, disdain and vigilance, and infamy. So these three sets at the top, they're called opposed pairs. So for example, right now our brutality is 55% and finesse is only 45. So because we fought the knight and we're kind of exhibiting that kind of aggression, our brutality is going up and our finesse is going down. And then below for wealth, we have 5,000 gold coins. Wounds are uninjured. So going back to the game. Okay. You scared the knight away. And now, you know, it's going to get annoying. Keep calling you great and mighty dragon. What is your name? So now this is another part of the character creation. You can pick a few prefab names, or you can put your own one in here. So we're just going to go with that. Will you be male or female? Again, kind of more character creation. Okay, as you think about it, the knight's attack was probably inevitable. After all, you did just kidnap the princess from right out of her tower. Although, isn't it a little sexist to always kidnap princesses? So you can refute that and say, sure, it's always princesses. Just be kind of arrogant there, and I'll say, you know, I think I kidnapped a prince just to avoid being sexist. Okay, so we do that. And now another kind of character customization thing, specifying the color of your hide. So let's go with gold. How many wings you have, we'll go with 5. Is the top of your head ridged or smooth? Go with ridged. And then now your wings, feathery, leathery, or scaly? Go with leathery. So as you kidnap the prince, you beat your leathery golden wings and flew off into the night as he clutched tightly to your ridged scalp to avoid plummeting to his doom. So you can see already, these are some pretty minor character customization options, but they're already being noted in the story. And then here, because we have a ridged scalp, it made it a little easier for the prince to kind of hang on. What are you planning to do with him anyway? So let's say it's all about companionship. Life can be lonely as a dragon, and interesting conversation is at a premium. The elite upbringing of royalty makes them more suitable for entertaining dragons. But what do you do after you're tired of this conversation? Let's let him slip away. Okay, so after we've played this whole introductory sequence, if you take a look at the stats page, and things have changed again. So our brutality and finesse, now they're kind of even. Our honor has taken a little increase over cunning, and our infamy has gone down. So even though those are kind of small decisions, you can see how they can impact the game and make things a little bit more interesting for the player. And as the game expands and the story goes, widens out, you can see all of the different opportunities for making things more customizable. Okay, so that's what a ChoiceScript game looks like. So how do you get ChoiceScript and get started? So if you go to this page here, make your own games, you can download the source code directly from Choice of Games. So we're just going to download it real quick over there. And it comes as a zip file. So when you open it up, and there's slightly different instructions for PC, but I'm on a Mac, so we're just going to go through with the Mac steps today. You start by clicking the serve.command. And now we're running ChoiceScript locally. So it's that easy. So let's take a look through some of these introductory kind of choices, and then we'll look under the hood and see exactly how this is working in the code itself. Okay, Your Majesty, your people are starving the streets and threaten revolution. Our enemies to the west are weak, but they threaten soon to invade. What will you do? So you can make war, beat swords to plowshares and trade food. or abdicate the throne? Let's do the trade food. The Westerners have you at the point of a sword. They demand unfair terms from you. Accept the terms, threaten to assault our fields if they don't offer better terms. Let's do that. They blink. Your Majesty gets a fair price for wheat. Next chapter. So this is important for something to keep in mind that we'll take a look at soon. What kind of animal will you be? Lion, tiger, or elephant? Let's go with tiger. In that case, you'll have powerful claws and a mighty roar. Which do you prefer? Leadership or strength? We'll go with leadership. What will you do today? Run for class president or lift weights? So this is obviously testing leadership or strength. We'll go with leadership here. You win the election. Next chapter. Under the hood, this chapter uses the go subcommand to execute subroutines. That sounds kind of complicated, but it's not too bad, and we'll take a look at that pretty soon. So the school bully is being mean to you. Stand up to him, give him my lunch money. We'll stand up to him. He's a lot tougher than you are. You hit him, but he barely even notices. How do you feel about this? Angry or sad? Go with angry. Maybe you can get even someday. He beats you up and takes your lunch money anyway. This is the last scene. The game is over. Okay, so those are kind of pretty rudimentary examples of choices in games. But let's take a look back in here. So in this code that I'm running ChoiceScript locally, if you take a look in this web directory, and then in my game, and then in scenes, excuse me, these scenes files, this is the actual game that's being run. So to kind of show you really quickly, if we do restart, so this is called My First ChoiceScript Game by Anonymous. If we go into startup, so this file is, it is startup. So it's when you start running the game, it's the first thing it runs. So here, we're setting the title and the author here. So instead of this, we're going to put like office hours game, and author, we're going to put Beth. If you save that, come back here and reload it, we can see that now that's changed real time because this is working locally. It's running ChoiceScript and it's using those files as the source. So that's pretty good. So if we take a look here again, if you look at the scene list, so this is the list that you're going to run the chapters in your game. And so for most games that come out, this will just be chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. For the sake of this test project, though, it's all these different kinds of things. And you can see in the scenes file, like these correspond to the different scenes here that we're specifying the order of. So if you scroll down a bit more, you see this create leadership and strength. This is creating these two variables at the start of the game. We'll come back to this a little bit later. So down here, okay, if we start the game, so you can see on the right what the game looks like, and on the left, here's the actual code running under the hood. And it's not too complicated. You can see that we use this asterisk choice symbol to kind of create a choice. Below that, there's these different pound signs with each specific choice, and then below them, nested, is whatever will happen next. So you can see if you pick this choice, you have subsequent choices. Down here, there's a couple others. And down here, there's just one. So if you pick this, let's see, we pick this first one, make preemptive war, we'll have this next set of choices here. And if you pick the third one, you're gonna get this final text, cunning plan. And then there's this finish command, and it says next chapter. So the finish command here indicates that the scene we're in is going to end, and we're gonna play the next one. So when we do that, what kind of animal will you be? So now it's running the animal scene. And you can see that here. Right, so the interesting thing about this one is it's introducing the concept of labels and the go-to command. So because both a lion and tiger have claws, we're actually just reusing the same text no matter which one you pick. So the way labels work is you're kind of establishing a place to go to. That's a reference for later. So if you pick the lion choice, you say go to clause, the ChoiceScript will look for a label that you specified called clause, and it's going to display that same text. So in the game itself, if you click lion, in that case, you'll have powerful clause and mighty roar. It's just displaying the same thing down here. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind as you're planning your game, and when you structure it, so that if you have like a couple choices that will eventually lead in the same place, you can structure that flow that way. Excuse me. I'll finish again. So the next chapter is going to be, actually, let's take a look. So after animal variables. Okay, so now we have this set leadership 10 and set strength 10. So these are the two variables that we're testing, and we're setting the initial value to them to be 10. The choice here is pretty simple. Which do you prefer, leadership or strength? So depending on which one you pick, so this set leadership 10, it's going to modify the previous value of this. So it's adding another 10 to it. So if you pick leadership, now your leadership stat will be 20 total. And you can take a look at that in the stats page here. So let's see, 10 and 10. If you go back here, click leadership. Now leadership is at 20% and strength was unchanged. And then you have this, and we're using the go-to and the label for action. And then the next choice, what will you do today? Run for class president or lift weights. These are the two options. So now we have the concept of testing variables that you've set. So if you click run for class president, it's going to test your leadership stat. And if it's greater than 15, you're going to win the election. If it's not, you'll lose the election. If you do the lift weights, it'll do the same thing. It'll test to see if your strength is higher than 15. Because ours is only 10, it will fail. And the fail condition here is you drop the weights and hurt yourself badly, you never recover, go to scene death. So this is interesting here, this go to scene, because if you look at the startup, death is the last one. And this is actually the only way to trigger this death scene, and it was included at the very end. So that's an interesting way of kind of using that go to scene command to specify the order of chapters that you go in. But for now, we'll just do the normal path here. You win the election. And let's see, after that one, oh, it's a go sub. Under the hood, this chapter uses the go sub command to execute subroutines. So let's go look and see what that actually means. So here's the same text. The school bully is being mean to you. The choice here, stand up to him or give him my lunch money. So the text that you first, it doesn't matter which one you pick, you have some, you have a line of text and then this go sub thing and feelings. So this kind of functions a similar way that we had the go to and label commands. So we're labeling this section with feelings, and the go to is, the go sub is different from go to in that go to, it'll just put you in that label and then the rest of the game will work. But with go sub, you're going to this subroutine here. It's going to run this. So you have a separate choice. And then at the end, you have this return command that'll put you back right where you were. So if we pick stand up to him, okay, he's a lot tougher than you are. So it's going to display this, but you hit him, but he barely even notices. We'll do go sub feelings here. Now we're in here and we have this other choice. How do you feel about this? And you have angry or sad. Doesn't really matter which one you pick. We'll do sad this time. You do your best, but you think you can probably see your shame. So now we do return, and it's going to put you back up to here where we were. So the text that displays is he beats you up and takes your lunch money here. So go sub is another interesting tool to have in figuring out if you want to have a choice and just handle the logic in a separate place other than the main flow. Oh, next chapter. Let's see. Next chapter is ending. And this one is pretty simple. This is the last scene, the game is over. There's a special ending command that you use to just indicate that the game is over. So that's different from the finish command. Finish command will move you to the next scene in the scene list. Ending will just end the game entirely. So that is a good kind of like initial introduction to how ChoiceScript works and what the games look like. And another tool that's good is there's these two built-in tools that you can use for testing your game, and they're called quick test and random test. They're built right into ChoiceScript, so you don't have to do anything else to access them. And the way that you run them is by going to whatever the name of your server is locally, /quicktest.html or randomtest.html. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to get rid of all this. And for quick test, we'll just do quicktest.html. When you do that, so it's done already, it's that quick. So what this is doing is walking through all of the possible branches that somebody can play in your game just to make sure that something isn't broken and that the language won't work. So when that breaks, let's take a look and see what that looks like. Let's go to animal. So in this animal section, say I forgot to finish the game, and I just didn't have the finish section in there. Oh, when I tried running it again, it said quick test failed. And it says animal line 26 it is legal to fall out of a choice statement you must go to or finish before the end of the indented block. So it's a little strange, but it more or less makes sense. And you can see that if you had a text editor with line numbers on the left, you could see this is line 26 and I'm missing the finish. So I put that back in and I reload this and it works this time. So quick test is good to run every so often when you're working on a game, just to make sure that you're not, just like accumulating a whole bunch of different kinds of errors. For random test, so this one is a little bit more in depth. You can see the default is 10,000 iterations, which is kind of overkill for this game. There's a few different options you can have here, showing the full text during the game, highlight gender pronouns, which is helpful because if you have a game where a character can be multiple choices of different genders, just to make sure that's consistent, showing the line coverage statistics, scrolling to the bottom. So let's see, we'll do a smaller run of say 700 iterations. So, excuse me. So it's just kind of running through these really quickly. And even though this is a short game, even for longer games, these test programs are pretty quick. So if you keep scrolling to the bottom, cool, it passed. So if I had the same kind of error here, it would have broken and it would have provided you a line number. So between these two test frameworks, they're a great way to make sure that the game you're working on will actually run. Okay, so now after we've taken a look at kind of the basics of how ChoiceScript works and the ways to test your game, we're going to look into some other functionality to keep in mind as you work on it. So we looked at setting variables to numbers if you want to use those to test different values like a leadership and strength. You can also set them to true or false if you only want to test if something is true or not. So you can see here, set finished false. We're setting the finished variable to false. And you can also set variables to conditions. So if you had a previous variable named guess, and a player could guess something to be red or blue or green or a different color, you're checking to seeing if that guess variable is equal to a certain thing. And then if that condition is true, it will set correct to be false or true. You can also test multiple conditions. So instead of only testing leadership or strength, you can use this AND operator, to test multiple, you could test leadership and strength. There's an OR operator, so you can test leadership or strength, depending on how the choice is set up. For the NOT operator, you can check to just see if something is not true. So if strength is not greater than 70. And you can also make these conditions kind of complicated. So you have like a couple nested conditions down there, but as long as it ultimately like evens out and you don't have dangling parentheses, ChoiceScript will allow it. So there's lots of flexibility. Let's see, I'm just gonna remove this. You can add conditions to display certain choices and gray out unselectable options with the selectable if function. So over here in the actual text, you can see we have this phone battery left variable that I set to false. And the choice is how do you find your way home? So the two options that you can use are I use the paper map, I ask for help, and then down here I'm using the selectable if. So if phone battery left is true, then this option will be available, but it's not because this is false. So you're out of battery, so you can't use your phone's GPS. But we can still display it here as kind of a nudge for players that, oh, there's different paths that can happen depending on other choices you may have taken before. You can also hide previously selected choices when allowing many options in a choice with the hide reuse function. So for this one, the first choice you have is 1, and we're using hide reuse there. And then you have 2, and I can't decide. So over here on the right, if you pick 1 from the first choice, it's going to, so we have this go to start for all 3 choices, the top 3, and it's just going to replay this choice again until you do the done at the end. So after you pick 1, because hide reuse is being used, it's going to get rid of that choice. So you can only use that once. It's an interesting tool to use. Fair math modifiers are probably the most complicated concept in ChoiceScript, but it isn't too bad once it takes a little bit to sit in. And the basic idea here is that if you have stats where you want to make sure they can't go below 1 or below 100, you'll use this so you can set up ways to modify stats without exceeding those values. And a good example is like a health bar in a regular video game. So say if you never want to go above 100 health, but you still want to be able to get power-ups and stuff, you can use fair math to do that. And in ChoiceScript, it looks like this. So you have a percentage plus and then a number, or percentage minus then a number. So going a little bit into the details, this is straight from the Choice of Games ChoiceScript help page. So this is pretty much saying what I was saying. Stats that display on the screen usually range from 0 to 100, but it can be hard to guarantee that they never accidentally gain more than 100 points if you want to keep that as the maximum. And the idea is that if you have a variable and you want to increase it, it becomes harder to increase and easier to decrease. So you're also making sure that the choices they're making aren't going to overpower or underpower them, depending how their game works. So this bottom part is really the key. So if you have large scores, it makes it harder to increase. So if your leadership is already 90 and you're increasing it by 20% with a fair math operator, it's only going to increase it by 2. So it becomes even harder to get to that 100. But if your leadership is only 10 and you use the fair math operator with 20, it's going to boost it up 18 points. So you have bigger swings if your scores are smaller. And this is just more of a game balancing thing to make sure that choices can modify a player character's stats in an interesting way. In terms of resources, there's a whole bunch of different ways to get help as you're working on a game and talk with other writers. There's the official Choice of Games forums. There's an unofficial Discord. There's a few other Discord groups aside from like the main unofficial one. The link is here. And there's also Seaside, which a developmental tool, and that stands for ChoiceScript Integrated Development Environment. So if you kind of are getting the hang of ChoiceScript and you want a couple more tools built into it, like you can run the testing suite even easier from within it, this is another open source tool that's open to use. Okay, now we're going to get into some game design tips. So the first step is to play some ChoiceScript games. Before you really have a sense of how these work and how you want to write your own, it definitely helps to play some and see what's already out there. As you're playing, notice which ones you like and kind of see if you can figure out why you like them. Are the choices interesting? Is the writing well done? Are the stats interesting? And a lot of them have the first few chapters available to play for free. So you can definitely try a whole bunch of different ones before deciding if you want to pay for the whole thing, or if something isn't kind of something that's interesting to you, it's also helpful to see why. Maybe the choices weren't set up in as good a way as they could. Step 2 is come up with an idea and then get a plan going. I really strongly recommend that you keep your first game to a very small scope. And generally, if you have an idea and you think that that's too small, that's kind of a good way to know that you found the right size scope. Scope creep is a big problem in video game development, where you come up with an idea and think, oh, cool, we'll just add this thing. And then suddenly, months later, you're still working on that feature or whatever it is. And it definitely happens in text games too. So a smaller scope is definitely a good way to go. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can play in your game. There's no real kind of official way to do it. But as long as you have some kind of process of keeping track of things, I think that's a good way. I suggest using a branching dialogue tool. So there's a few different options. One that I've used before is called Chat Mapper, which is only for PC, but that's pretty solid. And then Twine is another good one. And that's for PC, Mac, where you can also use it in the browser. And that's what the screenshot is to the right there. So you have these different nodes, you can kind of drag them around. And tools like this make it easy to visualize your game and how you're planning it. And it's also easy to make changes. So I'm going to show you real quick. This is, I'm using Twine to plan a game I'm working on. And you can see this is one of the earlier chapters, but there's a whole lot going on here. And it becomes kind of hard to keep track of if you're just doing it purely in text. And it also makes it easier to say, oh, I want to add a choice here. You can just add nodes and kind of make your adjustments that way. So I definitely would recommend using one of these tools or something similar to visualize the game as you're playing it. So we'll go through kind of a short version of this, but my process that I've used for years has been the 6-step process. And I also wrote a blog post on my own blog that you can check out afterwards. It kind of goes into detail. So the first step is stub text. Second is stub text revision. And these colors are just what I use to tag the different nodes as I'm going through each one. So as you're going through a chapter, I tag them in different colors just to make sure that I didn't miss one. So that's a kind of helpful thing to do also. Step 3 is the first pass text. Step 4 is text revision, variables, and export and logic. So taking a look at this, the step 1 is subtext. It's all about just laying down the structure for how the chapter will play out. So instead of writing any actual dialogue or descriptions at this point, I'll use subtext, subdialogue as placeholders to indicate who's going to say what and when they're going to say it, and what the player's options will be. You want to avoid too many revisions at this point too. It's more of a kind of brainstorming first step of getting the structure down. So in the following sequence from a previous game I wrote called The Last Monster Master, one of the player's monsters is stuck on a tree during an attack. The player must choose to use their telepathy or body language detection skills to help the monster withstand the attack or to run over and help directly. And so I used ChatMapper when I was planning this game. So this is kind of what ChatMapper looks like. But you can see over here for these options, it's really just kind of stubbed out. Okay, the option is use telepathy, use body language, or I'm going to run over. And over here, if it was successful, I tell them to carefully climb down. If it failed, and I'm testing this other variable, and I'm just kind of writing out what the basics of what will happen. I'm not too worried about like the final text or what that will look like yet. Step 2 is the subtext revision, and I tag that in yellow. So I only really focus on revising the structure at this point. We're just looking at the placement of things about like where the choices are. Don't really worry about misspelling or anything text related, since all of this stuff is subject to be rewritten later. You're primarily looking for choices or option branches that don't really make sense or are inconsistent with the story, edge cases that can lead to problems, and dead ends that don't link back to the main narrative flow. For step 3 is the first pass text. So with the actual structure kind of set up, now it's time to write the actual text that the player will see. So this is a pretty straightforward pass, but like before, you want to stay focused on only working on the text. You don't want to worry too much about setting variables for structures or setting values for variables, setting up transitions or anything that isn't just the pure writing. And just like most writing, this is the most fun and also the most time intensive or worst kind of part. So here's what that same chapter looks like here. So I've replaced all of that stub text with the first pass of what I think should actually happen. Notice that all these if terrain high, if knowledge high, all that stuff is still kind of stubbed out now because I'm not working on the variables yet. Step 4 is the text revision. So now you're editing the text that you put in. Everything related to the text is fair game here. So spelling, grammar, incorrect references to characters or places, better word choices, that kind of thing. Step 5, now it's time for the variables. So the structure is in there and the text is in a good spot. So you want to look for all the places where you have variables set up, specifically anywhere where you have player stats being modified or referenced in order to determine outcomes. And you can refine the specific values later in other revisions and gameplay balancing and things. But at this point, you just want to set a baseline for what you think those different variables need to be. So remember, we had that leadership, testing if leadership is greater than 15. So it's setting those baseline variables and values there. So here now I have if telepathy is greater than 70, and if the first monster's terrain is better than their knowledge. So there's some kind of like complicated variable setups here. And then here I have, okay, if the telepathy wasn't greater than 70, it's going to go here. And then there's another variable check here. The last step is export and knowledge and logic. So here you're going to take your almost finished chapter into the development tool or language. In this case, is ChoiceScript. And I typically move each node from the visualization tool directly in a ChoiceScript, and then as I'm copying it over, I kind of change the syntax and everything. But it is possible to look into automated solutions if you're tech savvy. So like exporting the files from whatever visual kind of design tool you're using directly to ChoiceScript. Okay, so the last part here, publishing your game and making money with Choice of Games. So when working with Choice of Games, they have 3 different publishing tiers. The first is just called their Choice of Games label, which is mainly for experienced writers. Heart's Choice, which is for experienced romance writers. There's a whole subgenre for romance choice games. And then hosted games for new writers. And you can look at all of this information here, just looking for writers link. They're really upfront with how they work with writers, and it's really nice to see that they're as transparent as possible. And also they make a note on their site that our games, their design, and our company values are inclusive and egalitarian. We encourage applications from writers who are women and other marginalized genders, LGBTQ, disabled, and persons of color. So they're really very inclusive in making sure to involve as many people as possible who want to try writing a game using ChoiceScript. So looking at these 3 tiers. So for Choice of Games and Heart's Choice, they provide editorial and art support. They'll help you find an artist and work with you to get a cover. They have an advance schedule. They pay out royalties. There is a submission process where you work with them along predefined milestones, and also give you marketing support. So the two main options are either 25% royalties against a $7,500 advance split out over milestones, and that advance is $5,000 for Heart's Choice, or 10% royalties against a $10,000 advance over milestones, and that's only for Choice of Games. For hosted games, they offer a 25% royalty rate on all sales, but there's no submission process. So you pretty much have to create the game yourself and then bring it to them at the end. And again, all of those financial details are publicly available on the site. It's all very transparent. This may change at some point, but as of right now, these are still the rates and the policy. So we'll take a look at hosted games and kind of how this works. So if you do the hosted games route, you will also need to run a public beta with other people on the Choice of Games forums, and they do those often. When you submit your game, it will undergo content review to make sure there's nothing offensive or kind of objectionable. Otherwise, they don't do any editorial support. And then you just submit the final game when you're all done. So there's no milestone process or any kind of submission that way. So doing the hosted games route does require a good amount of self-motivation, but it's a good way to make money and get started writing games, especially if you've never done it before, you're just kind of curious about how it works. And they've had several authors submit through the hosted games platform that have had success with games. Maybe they've gone on to do more games. And then a note about IP ownership. At any of these publishing tiers, the author retains their intellectual property. So at any point, like you own the game that you're writing. They're just doing the royalty rate. So they're very pro-author and pro-developer as they're working. They have a really good ethos that way. In terms of distribution, there's a lot of different ways that they distribute your game. So you can play them through the official Choice of Games website, like we played through Choice of Dragons. There is an iOS app that kind of has like all of their games that they've released through this omnibus app. They have apps on the Google Play Store, Amazon Kindle Fire Store, and then also on Steam. So there's lots of different ways that they can help you get your game out there than you would have had access to otherwise. And that's about it. That's all I kind of had right now. If you're interested in kind of taking a look and following some of the links yourself, there's a link to this slide, to these slides up at my site, spendserviss.com/talks. So you can check it out there. And otherwise, yeah, that's it. We can open it up for questions.
Awesome. That was super informative. I had a question personally about the marketplaces that you can use to promote your games. Do you play them within those environments specifically, or is it like now my game becomes its own standalone app that anyone can play elsewhere?
That's a good question. So it kind of has changed. When I wrote my first game in 2014 or 15, they were releasing apps individually. So you would go and just download that specific app, at least for the App Store. But I think now going forward, I know that they release games through like their like compendium apps, like that omnibus thing for iOS. I think it depends on the platform. For Steam, I think it's also individual games. So it may just depend.
So then your app or your game becomes part of a marketplace that people can kind of sift through and play around with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. And have you published any games yourself? I'm sure the answer is yes.
Yeah, that first game, I have it on my phone, that we walked through, the last Monster Master came out in 2014 or 2015, I think. And I mean, part of the reason I wanted to do this talk is just because personally working with Choice of Games was really great. Like they're really supportive. They provide good feedback, and they're providing like an avenue for people to get started writing these games, and ways to make money and even sustain careers. So I'm working on another game with them now, and they've been really great the whole time.
Nice. What types of games are the most popular? If somebody is thinking of designing an app, what sorts of features should they incorporate in their own games?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good question. So there's one good way to see is if you download their Omnibus app for iOS, if you have an iOS device, and you could just sort by ratings. You could see like which ones are most popular, which ones aren't as much. It depends because like there's a whole separate romance label. So people who are into that, like there's lots of different options there. They've also started working with the license holder for Vampire the Masquerade, which is like a long-running tabletop role-playing brand. And they have 3 different games coming out there. So they've been doing partnerships with other companies to make like brand new games set in their universes. So there's interesting stuff there if you know if you're familiar with that. But otherwise, like a lot of the tricky part of this is coming up with is doing research to make sure your games have good choices. Like what makes a good choice? What makes something interesting to kind of be stuck between? And I think, and I mean, I'm still learning this too because it's like a really hard, it can be like a lifelong study. But the basic idea is you want to present players with choices where there's no wrong choice, there's no like clearly right choice, where you have like multiple things that are all good, but we're trying to make you think which one is the most interesting. So putting people in that position where you don't know what to pick because you're not sure what to do, that creates like the most engagement, I think.
And I'm sure that to kind of transitioning into this next question, writing for a game is different than just writing fiction or writing a novel necessarily. So what process did you go through to write your gaming book? And do you have any recommendations on how to publish tech books?
Wait, is this about the text game or about
This is about publishing books about gaming.
Oh, okay. So I self-published that book on how to get started in games. And that was just through Amazon, through Kindle. So I didn't work with like a traditional kind of publisher that way. I'm not as versed in that. I've only self-published that one book. So that's a whole other thing. Like the whole kind of marketing angle there is, it's very, very, it can get very involved.
What about even the process of writing a book? Because I'm sure a tutorial is different than just something that's narrative.
Yeah, so when I wrote that book, I did a similar kind of thing with as far as the planning. So it wasn't interactive, so I didn't have like the visual tool, but coming up with as much of an outline as I could and doing like that planning work was really useful for me. And then like fleshing out each section and kind of as I went, not like that full 6-step process for like a regular book, but going through it in passes and seeing, okay, does this make sense to go here? Does that make sense to go there? And then the same thing with for the hosted games approach, where they want you to get people to beta test, like making sure you have people that can read early versions and give you feedback. That feedback is really useful.
Got it. And when you are storyboarding a game, switching from publishing to gaming, do you begin with the end in mind, or is it kind of like as you're going through it, you're developing the characters when you're storyboarding?
I mean, beginning with the end in mind? Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. And that is absolutely something that I do. And that's something that I kind of learned or was nudged to by Choice of Games as you work with them. So in their submission process for those, the first 2 publishing options, Choice of Games or Heart's Choice, they do require like a submission. First you submit a concept, and if the concept is approved, then they require like, okay, what's the chapter breakdown? What are some sample choices? What are the narrative goals? And then what are the end states? So you do want to make sure you have something interesting that the players are working toward the end. But the idea of having like an ending, like a specific kinds of ending, is more like a traditional non-interactive kind of fiction concept. For this, for interactive games, you do want to make sure that any possible ending that the player can get to will be satisfying. Will fit their specific playthrough. There isn't any right or wrong ending. So instead of like coming up with like a list of all of them, it's more of a combination of looking at all of the possible goals that a player can achieve, and the best games will present, I don't know, 5 to 10, and say, okay, here are all the goals. You can pick which ones you want to go for, but if you pick this one, you can't go for this one. So it's creating that choice, that trade-off. And then depending on how all of those, the player progresses toward those goals, it's going to create kind of like a matrix of possible end states. So maybe if you succeed in this goal, but you fail this one, or we succeed that, but like half fail this one, or nothing happens. Those two things together will create a different combination of an ending that, you know, maybe you never actually sat down and wrote and thought through, but it's because it's how the player kind of put it together in their experience. So yeah, definitely working through the ending and working through like this kind of goal structure is a really solid way to go about planning it.
Yeah, and that gets beyond just game design. Now you're into the space of like, as an author, how do I create tension and how do I create some type of resolution? So I would imagine when you're teaching these games to newbies, it can get pretty difficult to teach some of these concepts. Have you ever worked with kids or even just new learners with designing games, and what's a concept that they find particularly hard to grasp?
Man, these are really good questions. I don't think I've worked too much with people that are brand new to it yet. I did do another talk in 2018 at another game conference. And if you go to that benservice.com/talks, those slides are up there too. I think it was from 2018. And in that talk, I kind of go into a little bit of like working with choice of games, but then I go through that whole kind of submission process in detail. So like if you're interested in that, there's a lot of information there. And like even though it's a submission process, it really is kind of like a tutorial of sorts, because they're trying to communicate, okay, we've published many games, we know what kind of works, we need to see that you can set up the narrative goals in a way that will make sense in a story this way. So I would say that's a great way to do it. There is also a really good blog post that somebody just posted, another author, he posted on the Choice of Games forums, and he played every single Choice of Games game that's been out, which is, that itself is kind of impressive. But he did this, and then he had like a big summary. It's like, here are my takeaways. Like, here are the things that you need to do, and here are the things that you shouldn't do. Here are the things that the worst games, you know, by sales or ratings have in common, and here's what you can avoid. So I would suggest taking a look at the Choice of Games forums and looking for that post. I may, you know, maybe we can follow up in a tweet or something to this, and I'll point that out. But that was really useful. It was a really good kind of research. And that's kind of what makes this stuff interesting, because people are still like trying to analyze, like, how do these things work? You know, having the tool and the language is part of it. It's like, if you have a car, that's great. How do you drive the car? You know, how do you race a car? Like, it's knowing how to use the tool is entirely different from just having it.
Yeah. If you could follow up and send it to us, then we'll share it with people either via social media or through an email to the people who register. We can do it that way.
Yeah, definitely.
How long would you say from end to end it takes to actually design and execute a game?
Good question. I think it took me, for the previous game I did, maybe a year and a half. They take a while, but again, that's why I was so adamant about keeping a small scope for your game. Like the first one I did, I didn't really know what I was getting into. It ended up being 250,000 words. So they can grow and get really big. So keeping a small scope, especially in the beginning, you know, like is very crucial, because if you keep that momentum, it's easier to keep that momentum going if you have a smaller game and you can see, oh, okay, I'm half done with it, I'm gonna make it, as opposed to something that kind of keeps going on and on. And some of the longer games that Choice of Games has released, like, have taken, you know, a year, maybe 2 years. I was just looking through one of their bigger games, I think had over 1 million words in it. So it kind of depends on like how ambitious do you eventually want to get to. And again, if you're just starting out, small is better.
Yeah, I was not expecting that. I thought you would say like couple months.
Oh yeah.
For people who are still maybe unfamiliar with the space, can you think of any popular examples of choice-based games?
Oh, that's great. If anyone's played like a visual novel, that's kind of a good example, because it's more choice-based, but then there's like every page is usually illustrated. If you've played like a more popular RPG, a role-playing game, there's usually some elements where you have to make a choice at some point, you know, add a player to your party, or, you know, go this way or go that way. So it's kind of like a light element involved. Let's see.
Have you ever played this is one that comes to mind for me, the Netflix game Bandersnatch?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly the kind of thing that I was trying to think of. But yeah, so it's a Netflix game. It's like a Black Mirror universe thing, I think. So as you're playing the game, there's different choices that pop up. So like, you want to do this, you want to do that. And I haven't played that yet. It's on my list. But from what I hear, it does it well enough so that if maybe there are some bad endings, it's more of like a choose your own adventure, like those old books, where like if you get a bad ending, you can still rewind and try other options. So there's that. Oh, I think Netflix also did one with Kimmy Schmidt, like the very ending, the very last season, I think was like a choose your own adventure, game or kind of one-off. So we are starting to see some of the concepts from this like interactive narrative kind of start to bubble out into the real world.
Yeah. We have another user question here, and I hope that I'm going to articulate this well. If someone has an idea or a concept that they want to translate, and the associated animated object or character to use, what is the best and most simple tool to use?
That sounds like they may be wanting to get visuals involved in the game, possibly. So I don't think ChoiceScript would be the best fit, because there is support for like images that I've seen in some other games will have just like static pictures, but nothing animated.
Okay. Do you know of another tool that might be a better fit for them?
Let's see. So Twine, which we took a quick look at in terms of visualization. So that's like its own fully fledged interactive text game format, but it's mainly played in the browser, and it's like a free open source thing. So there's no real kind of Twine store. They don't do like a similar kinds of publisher services that Choice of Games does. If you're more technical and like web development, I think there's ways to get more features involved there. I think there's another tool called Renpy, RENPY, that's more of like a visual novel tool. So they'll have like different choices you can pick, and then images. I'm not sure if it supports animation. It might just be static images, but that would be something else to take a look at.
Okay, so Renpy and Twine, Uzochukwu. Renpy and Twine. I think we can wrap up there. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ben. I learned a lot. I'm sure other people have learned a lot. To the people who are watching out there, we host office hours every second Saturday. Our next event is May 8th. And if you need one-on-one assistance, we have individual office hours immediately after the feature presentation. So today that's happening from 1:30 until 3:30. And you can sign up for its slot now at thebeanpath.org/live. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at The Bean Path. And you can buy cool merch like this shirt and learn about upcoming events. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on May 8th.
Great. Thanks.